Welcome to the Chronicles of the King podcast. I am Megan.
And I'm Tessa, and we're so excited to offer you guys our very first series. We have been wanting to do this series for a little while, and it took a lot of research and a lot of hard work to get here. So, our first series is going to be several episodes about Elvis's family.
Yes, so this week we are starting with his maternal side, so talking about his mother Gladys and her family, specifically her grandparents. But we have a couple episodes that we're thinking to bring in the future. Tessa, would you like to tell everybody about those?
Absolutely. So, at first, we were going to do an episode. We're like, oh, let's just talk about his parents and his grandparents. And then we were like, oh, hold up.
Mm,
That is like way too much information to do in one
way too
episode.
much.
So we decided to split it up. This first episode is going to be, like we said, about
Hmm.
Gladys and Gladys's parents. The next episode, we're going to be talking about Vernon, so Elvis's father, and Vernon's parents. And then we're also hoping to do a couple series on his cousins, his aunts and uncles,
Yep,
and also to talk about Lisa Marie, obviously, and his grandchildren who are still carrying on his legacy.
absolutely. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
So, yeah, Tessa, give us a little rundown of the family tree.
So, yes, we are talking about Gladys Love Smith Presley. So,
Yes.
she is Elvis's mother. So, her parents were Bob and Doll Smith, born in 1878 and 1876, respectively. And they had nine children. So, Gladys was one of nine. She came from a super big family. The oldest of these siblings actually passed away in infancy. Her name was Effie. She was just a little over a year old. But for the majority of her life, Gladys grew up with this big family where she was one of eight. She was one of the middle children. And interestingly, her sister Cleets Lee Smith married Vernon Presley's brother Vester
Mhm.
in September 1935. So one of Elvis's cousins, who we will talk about in a later
Yep.
episode, Patsy, she was his double first cousin.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started with Doll Smith, Gladys's mother. Okay. So she was born Octavia Luvenia Mansell in Itawamba County, Mississippi, to Albert White and Martha Sue Mansell in 1876.
Yeah, and throughout her life, she had several nicknames,
Hmm.
Lucy, Lou, all kind of taken from her middle name, but the nickname that stuck the most was Doll. Um,
Yes.
and do you want to tell us
So
why that is?
Yes, so for most of her life, she was always known to be kind of sickly. She was always battling bad health. She was kind of an invalid, sticking to her bed. And, it was always said that she never went outside. If you wanted to see her, you had to go to her.
Hmm.
So,
But
oh,
Miss Doll, not only was she a little bit fragile, like a porcelain doll, she was very beautiful. And
hmm
apparently, she was a relentless flirt. She
hmm
herself was the youngest of seven, and so was used to like being babied. And so she kind of let everyone in her life baby her.
yeah,
And in Baby Let's Play House, Alana Nash's book, she says that Doll ruled the family with her sickness.
but as you said, she was a relentless flirt.
Mm-hmm.
And in Elaine Dundee's book, Elvis and Gladys, she is quoted saying, during the 1890s, Doll would attend parties and picnics. This is what was said of her. And the gayest of all the girls at these gatherings, the acknowledged beauty was the slim, exquisite, tubercular, porcelain featured, spoiled third daughter of White Mansell, Doll.
Right. And so
Mhm.
Adele was a bit of a flirt, and she actually didn't get married until she was 27 years old, which, if we think about in 1903, that's like basically you're
An old
decrepit by
maid.
that point. Yeah, you're an old
Yeah.
maid, like you're done. And she married her first cousin, Bob.
Hmm. Which was
In
something common at the time in the South.
right.
Very
And
small community, so that's why it was kind of common.
yeah. And they got married in Lee County, Mississippi, which is the same county as Tupelo is
Hmm. Yeah.
in 1903.
Yep.
So
So a
I was going to say, you want
yeah.
to tell us a little bit about Bob?
Yeah, so we're getting on to Bob. Bob. All right, so he was the second son of Mileage Obadiah, Ob for short, Smith, and Anna Mansell in Lee County, Mississippi in 1878.
Yeah, so he was 2 years younger
Mhm.
than Doll, and he was like notably handsome. And so she was 27, hashtag a spinster. And which like I'm about to be
Hmm.
26, so she's real.
Yep.
And he was like very handsome and a little bit younger. So she kind of bagged herself a cutie, I guess.
Yeah. And he was known to be he was tall and stout
Mhm.
with blue eyes and dark hair. Sound familiar?
Yeah, those blue eyes and dark hair.
Hmm. Yep.
Not only was he handsome, but Bob was also known as a very hard worker, which totally shaped who Gladys became and who she raised her son to be.
Yeah. So, doing a little digging, when he registered for the draft in 1918, it was noted that he was a carpenter, and that is what he was doing at the time to support his wife and his very large family.
Hmm. But in addition to being a carpenter, Bob was also sharecropping, doing various
Mhm.
odd jobs, and interestingly, he was moonshining, which allegedly he
Yes.
was very good at. And do you want to tell us
Yes.
a little bit about what it
So
was
what
like
he
to be a moonshiner in those
Yes.
days?
So this is, we're talking about pre-prohibition. So if anybody doesn't know, prohibition was the period of time when the government deemed that it was illegal to sell alcohol. So that's kind of where you're getting, speakeasies, that kind of era. But like Tessa said, he was notably very good at moonshining, not so much at farming, but he didn't do the moonshining gig. It was a side gig, the moonshining. So it
What was
wasn't
his side
his
hustle?
it was a side hustle. It wasn't his full-time job. So that's kind of why he didn't get caught. It was a little bit under the radar. So,
Because he busied himself with other things to make money
yes.
too, but he
Hmm.
had some good moonshine. Um,
Absolutely.
which I think it shows like, I don't know, it's just interesting to imagine what life would have been like then to have to
Yeah.
support a family like that big of a family with your wife
With
who's sickly
yeah.
and all these kids and one of Gladys's
Hmm.
siblings, he was deaf. So there
Yeah.
were like a lot of things going on in that family, and he was just a Bob Smith was a super hard worker, moonshining,
Yep.
sharecropping, the lot. He did it all.
Absolutely. And then in 1931, so like I said, he did a lot of sharecropping. In 1931, he and his family actually moved to a larger house that had, lots of room for farming, but it was there that he came down with pneumonia.
Right, shortly after moving into this big house and kind
Hmm.
of like achieving it, getting to that point of like security, moving everything into the house, he came down with pneumonia.
Yeah, and it was his doctor that said, I've just been over to Bob Smith's. He's got pneumonia and I can't do a thing about it. He won't last a week. And he actually, after his doctor was quoted saying this, he actually died the next day.
Yeah, and when Bob died, so this was October 1931, this is about three
Hmm.
and a half years before Elvis was born. His death was really sudden. Most people thought that Doll would be the first one to go,
Yep.
especially Gladys. I'm sure that's what she thought. She kind of
Hmm.
saw her father as this strong, hardworking figure who just kind of like suddenly came down with this illness, whereas her mother had been sick for her whole life.
Exactly.
So it was quite surprising that Bob went first. And then shortly after Elvis was born, so about 3 months after he was born, Doll passed away as well.
Hmm. So at this point, early in Gladys' life, she's experiencing, a tremendous amount of loss, and you can imagine how that's going to take a toll on her throughout what we'll cover just a little bit.
Right. And not only did she lose both her parents, she lost a baby at
Hmm.
birth.
Yeah.
So she lost a sibling before she was even born.
Yep.
She lost a baby at birth. She lost her father, this hardworking man. She lost her mother. Like there is a lot of tragedy in Gladys's
Hmm.
life. And I feel like why don't you tell us a little bit more about Gladys? I
Okay.
don't know about you, but I loved learning about her. I loved,
I did too. I think it makes her more human, makes her more understandable.
Right. She just seems like this kind of like martyr figure, kind of, I think in
Yeah, and
Elvis mythology. And it was nice to hear like
mhm.
these human sides to her and also
I
like her
think
character. I don't think it's talked
correct.
about
And
a
I think
lot.
it makes her more respectable in a way. Like you respect her and understand where she's coming from and why maybe she mothered Elvis in a certain way, why she had reactions to certain things. But
Right.
take it back to the beginning a little bit. So
Yes.
Gladys was born in 1912 in where I think we're going with again, if we mispronounce anything, we apologize, but we're saying Pontotoc County, Mississippi.
This was difficult for Megan
Yeah.
because she's from Maryland, so she wants to say
Yes, I wanted
Potomac.
to say Potomac, and it's not Potomac,
Yeah.
but we're Pontotoc, I think.
Pontotoc, we think.
Pontotoc, yes. And then Tessa, would you like to tell us maybe a little bit about Elvis's lineage, his heritage?
Yeah, so there's been a lot talked about Elvis's heritage, specifically the idea that he was Native American.
Mm,
This was kind of a story that was told throughout his life to him, and was also told throughout Gladys's life that they had Native American ancestry. So a recent article from the Commercial Appeal came out and said that Presley's mother, Gladys Love Smith, was Scots-Irish with some French, Norman, and Italian ancestry. There has been some research, but no official documentation, suggesting that Gladys may have had some Cherokee lineage as well, tracing back to her great great grandmother. So, this great great grandmother is the person who's often quoted. So, this would
hmm
be Elvis's great 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 grandmother,
Yes.
was allegedly a full blooded Cherokee Native American.
hmm
Named Morning White Dove. And this is something that's talked about a lot with Elvis. And I know I've read in certain places that they're like, oh, this is
hmm
where his high cheekbones came from. But I think it's
Yeah,
interesting. This article you shared it with me was pretty recent and kind of
it
didn't
was.
show
I believe it
any.
was currently while we're filming this is 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that there's no definitive
hmm
information, I guess. But in Elaine Dundee's book, Elvis and Gladys, she kind of
Yeah.
traces the maternal lineage really well. And I believe from when I was reading it, the way that she researched it, I do think that there was this lineage in Elvis's family.
hmm
But in Dundee's book as well, she talks about how like the maternal line is just not really researched very well in
Yeah.
general, but specifically to do with Elvis. So that
hmm
definitely would have something to do with it, I think.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit, I think we should talk a little bit about, Gladys's personality, her characteristics.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
one of the first things that stood out to us, which is in Elvis and Gladys, was the quote that says, in all of Lee County, there was no girl brought up under more adverse conditions socially, economically, and intellectually than Elvis's mother.
Right. And I just think
Yeah,
that's like, it's heartbreaking in a way too,
it
but it's
is.
also like how amazing that must have been to like that
Mm,
she had such a difficult upbringing and then life like changed both for
yeah.
good and bad. We will discuss. But
We'll discuss. But she still persevered through it all. That's kind of what
right.
I take away from it. And, persevering and through all of this, it is still said that this is quoted by, some people who knew her saying that she had the sweetest disposition of all the Smith girls. And that is also from Elvis and Gladys.
Right. But her
Yeah.
sister Lillian takes a little bit more of a
Yeah.
harsh sibling rivalry, I guess,
Yeah, we could say.
critique of her sister and
Yeah.
calls Gladys stubborn, high strung, and headstrong.
hmm
Um, Stubborn and headstrong remind me a little bit of the descriptions I've read of Elvis. I don't know about you.
Which you could maybe see where that rubs off a little
Mhm.
bit. But so, yeah, so that's a little bit about Gladys's personality. So we're kind of starting to see how her early childhood, we learned about Doll and Bob, how that upbringing is shaping her a little bit. And it continues to shape her. This is another quote from Elvis and Gladys. So it says, like all other children from the area, Gladys went to school only 4 months out of the year in the winter. For the rest of the year, she was needed in the fields, hoeing cotton, chopping cotton, picking cotton, pulling corn. Gladys was not good with books. Nevertheless, she loved school and especially loved the one sport that girls were allowed to play, basketball.
I like
Oh,
that. I like
I
that it
do too.
shows how much of a hard worker she was, but also that that was
Hmm.
so culturally what it was like back
Yes.
then, and specifically in that area and in that
Hmm.
particular, farming upbringing.
Yeah.
It's that hardworking essence of her father, I think, in a way.
Yeah, and like I said, like you said, the cultural thing at the time is, school education wasn't prioritized as much, and instead kids were at home, they were working, helping out around the house, they were farming. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But, even though she wasn't good at school, she did love school. And so at school, she made lots of friends and definitely very friendly. We got that from her characteristics. And it is quoted saying, Lillian, we're talking about her sister,
Mm-hmm.
same one who called her, saying that she was, frightened, says that Lillian remembers how frightened Gladys was at the first boy who asked her if he could walk her home. Apparently, she took off her shoes and ran. When he caught up with her, she made him walk on the one side of the road while she walked on the other.
I just really like that story. As soon as I read it, I was like,
Yeah,
I want us to talk about that. I feel
I
like
know.
it's just like a very sweet, innocent, naive,
Yeah.
girlish, like story that really
Mhm.
captures, I don't know, Gladys's
Yeah,
essence
and I
and
mean,
like,
even if she was quote unquote like frightful, and I think it just shows that, hey, I'm not gonna be too, outgoing, I guess you could say, which maybe she was a little shy instead of saying frightful.
right. And I think it's like, it's that bashfulness that I
Mhm.
think at the
Yes,
very
that's the word.
beginning, yeah, at the very beginning of Elvis's career, like we saw a lot of that.
Hmm.
And it must just have been, I don't think it's unique to Elvis and Gladys, but I think that culturally, like it was just such a different time. But I liked that story. It's so sweet.
Yes. And now I think we should talk Elvis. Obviously, a big part of his life was music.
Hmm.
And this is Tessa's area of expertise. So could
Yes.
you tell us maybe a little bit about Gladys and music?
Great. So obviously, Gladys's taste in music hugely impacted Elvis throughout his life and his recording career.
Mhm.
But Gladys herself loved music, and she loved music from an early age. She was often dancing when she was a teenager and was known about town for her Charleston, quoted as not missing a step and hot as a pistol. So I guess we can see where Elvis might get some of his dancing moves
Absolutely.
from. And after her father's passing, Gladys experienced what we would probably classify today as depression or a depressive
Hmm.
episode, and was very like lethargic, wouldn't leave the house. But one of the only sources of comfort to her in this time was going to church. And her family was a member of the Church of God, First Assembly of God. It's a holiness church, as they call it. And this was really pivotal because the music that they sang in these Assembly of God, First Church of God churches was entirely different and fused together a bunch of different genres. So this is something that I read in Elvis and Gladys, and I think that it's really interesting to talk about the musical perspective that Gladys experienced and would have then brought her son up with.
Hmm.
So this says that they were singing to Jesus, but they were singing the blues. The rhythm is syncopated. The notes are blues notes. There is the transitional flattening of thirds and sevenths in the melodies, and the emotion is as powerful as that of black music, but drier. It is as matter of factness were pushed to its ecstatic extreme. Like black sanctified music, there are always rhythm and tempo changes, and a voice, usually a soprano, often makes a rondo entrance and goes sailing off on its own, which tends to give the music a deceptively free and easy improvisational quality, which is not the case at all. These singers and musicians practice daily, and in the results, the ear can detect their discipline. The joyous noise they make is sad as well as happy, and hopeful as well as yearning. I just love that. I
Yeah.
feel like it shows so importantly how different
Hmm.
different denominations of churches and the music that they had in those churches really
Yeah.
impacted people's personal relationship with secular and sanctified music. And obviously,
Hmm.
this was a huge part of
Yeah.
Elvis's life, and like his whole thing was fusing together all these styles.
Exactly. And I definitely made me see that he got that from Gladys. Probably Gladys played that in the home growing up. That's what Elvis was used to. And obviously it rubbed off a little bit.
Right. And I think that also the not just the music, but the embodiment of the
Hmm.
performances in these churches,
Definitely.
it's more similar to like a modern day Pentecostal church,
Yeah, kind of
where
letting the music move you.
right, and like with the spirit like moving around.
Hmm.
Miss Kitty is gonna
Yeah,
jump up. I see her here. I see her
I
eyeing
see
up.
it too.
But she, had that background that was not like a
Yeah,
stuffy church upbringing. It was like a
no.
very exuberant movement, body driven church.
Hmm.
And so obviously when she saw her son performing in this embodied manner, it was
Yeah,
not like, what the hell is he doing? It was like, yeah,
exactly. She
people,
understood what he was doing.
right. And I don't know, it's just interesting how
Hmm.
if she'd been of a different denomination, like,
Or like stuffed shirt. Oh, don't do that. But she
right.
wasn't.
It's so interesting. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, just shows how important in that particular
Hmm.
sect, like music is so important and embodied and
Yeah.
impassioned.
Hmm.
And that had to have an impact on who she was and then in turn who she raised her son to be.
Exactly. And so again, keeping things chronological. So we
Mm-hmm.
talked about 1931 after her father passed away. Now we're getting to 1933. And it was in this year that Gladys met Vernon Presley. Now they had a very quick whirlwind romance that lasted for only 2 months. After those 2 months, they went to Pontotoc County, where Gladys was born, and got married. Now, at the time, Vernon was 17, so he was underage, and Gladys was 21.
Right. And they eloped to Pontotoc County, not the local Lee County.
Hmm.
Vernon was from like the quote unquote wrong side of the tracks. So the Presleys lived in East Tupelo on the wrong side of the tracks. And because they were so young and Vernon
Hmm.
was underage, they wanted to elope and
Yeah.
not be in Lee County where everyone knew their names. And they kind of went to a neighboring county to like fudge the marriage certificate and put different ages um, after being together for only 2 months.
Which we said that Gladys put that she was 19 and that Vernon was 21.
Right. And up
Yeah.
until her death, there was some like confusion about how old she actually was
Hmm.
because she kept up the ruse of being a little bit
I
younger
mean,
than
why
she
not?
actually was. I mean, it's not that big of a
Yeah,
difference.
no. But you can still say, 2 years is 2 years.
Right.
Right. But so after they were married, and this is from a quote from Elvis and Gladys,
This
said
book, let me tell you, this book is like
it gave
so
us all the
wonderful.
information.
It's really
So,
wonderful and
yes,
well researched.
absolutely. Well, yeah, there were some discrepancies, but I think we sorted those out. And for the most
Yeah,
part, these
absolutely.
are definitely well researched. But so in Elvis and Gladys, the quote is, about the end of June 1934, Gladys knew she was pregnant. Sometime around her 5th month, she was sure she was having twins. Not only was she unusually large early on in her pregnancy, and at a more advanced stage, could feel two babies inside her kicking separately, but the family had histories of twins on both sides.
Right, which we mentioned in our first
Hmm.
episode. And then we were talking a
Yep.
little bit about how in the Elvis movie, it makes it
Yeah.
seem like they didn't know they were having twins in the
Hmm.
2022 movie. But it does seem like they did know. And she
Hmm.
would have, I mean, if you're having twins, like, I feel like you got to know. Otherwise, you're like,
You
this
would
baby
think,
is so big. Um, and if there were twins in their families, then I think,
yeah, you would think based off of prior experience that maybe you're like, okay, this is what's going on.
right. But as we know, one of the twins did not survive.
Hmm.
Jesse Guerin was
Yep.
stillborn. And this was part of the reason that Elvis and Gladys became very close. They had a
Hmm.
super tight knit relationship until the day she passed and continued until, the day he passed.
Yeah,
He and his mother were very much intertwined. And I feel like there are a lot of reasons for that.
absolutely. I think, and some of the reasons that we discussed were, Alice was the only child, so obviously you're going to have that more one-on-one connection. Vernon, early on, Elvis's childhood was in jail, so for a while it was just Elvis and Gladys, and then just naturally they were a pretty close-knit family.
Right, especially compared to Gladys's upbringing with all those kids.
Yeah,
Um, to have a family of just three, and then also to have it then be just two for a while.
absolutely.
It has to be a much closer relationship.
And then talking like Elvis was the only child, and I feel like most people who are only child, because they have that one-on-one connection, their parents can be maybe a little bit overprotective in a way.
Right. This relationship between Elvis and Gladys was so foundational to who he was and
Hmm.
shaped a lot of like people's perspective of him. And his mom was always referred to kind of as overprotective. They suggested that she walked him to and from high school every day. Um, but I loved reading this in Dundee's book. I think she did a great job. She
Hmm.
offered a little bit of a different perspective as to why maybe Gladys was so attentive and like aware of Elvis's attendance in school and like really
Absolutely.
made sure that he was going to school.
Hmm. Yeah, so as we talked before, Gladys, she might have loved school, but she wasn't in school a whole lot because having to be at home farming with her family. And so Dundee explains in her book the reason she accompanied him so often is so obvious as it is moving. Her walking him to and from school was for her a ceremony, but celebratory and cautionary. She was celebrating that he was going to have the education neither she nor Vernon had had, and she was cautioning him from slipping away from school, as she had sometimes caught him by collecting him at the end of the day. Gladys was making sure that Elvis was going to get his high school diploma.
Right. And we touched on this a little bit in our first episode that Elvis was
Mm-hmm.
the first in his immediate family to get his high school diploma.
Yeah.
And I just think this perspective is not really one that's often talked about. People just kind of are like, oh, it's weird. She walked him to and
Yeah.
from school. But I think when you look at her background and you look at educationally the place she was coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and the family she grew up in, hard workers, but not, maybe not school smart or, and that she had a lot of hope that he would do better than either
Yeah, and I feel like that's
she or
like the
Vernon did.
sentiment most parents have is I want you to succeed. I want you to do better than I did so you can have a better
Right.
life. And so that's, I think, why she walked him to school. A big part of the reason. Not
Yeah.
just like, oh, I don't want you to get kidnapped or something.
Right. And
Yeah.
to kind of counter that like idea that she was walking him to school to like keep an eye on him, Dundee and several like childhood friends of Elvis's have said
Hmm.
that he had a lot of freedom in his childhood. Like he was
Yeah.
able to go and do stuff. He wasn't like just attached to his mother's hip like 24/7.
Hmm.
He was able to, go and play with the neighborhood kids, and he
Yeah.
wasn't just like kept a
Like in a
kept
cage
child.
at
Yeah,
home.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh, don't touch
Exactly.
that. Like, no.
Right.
So, but we're still talking about that even though they weren't necessarily like attached to the hip, they were very close. And so
Mm-hmm.
throughout Elvis's life, his relationship with his mother would have a significant impact on his life, defining his emotional landscape and guiding his actions.
Right. And because of their closeness and how tight knit they were,
Hmm.
specifically the two of them, I wouldn't say so much like from all the different things I've read, I feel like Elvis loved his father. I'm not saying he didn't, but he
Absolutely.
and his mother had something different. They had like
Hmm.
a thing going on. It was said they had like a psychic kind of connection, that she had a premonition of something
Hmm.
bad happening to him, and his car had caught on fire, and somehow she woke up in the middle of the night
Yeah.
and knew it. I mean, they were interlinked, they were connected.
Hmm.
Um, and because of this closeness, obviously his rise to stardom was so quick and
Hmm.
had a massive impact on his family, not just his parents, but his cousins, his friends, and his grandma,
Everybody.
like everyone
Yeah.
around him. But especially on Gladys, this had a huge impact on her.
Hmm. And so this is something we saw in the Elvis 2022 movie. So you get these different scenes where, they're in Lauderdale courts and Elvis is scolding his mother or telling her that, I wish you wouldn't drink so much. And this is something that is always talked about and something when I interviewed Christy Emmons Jones, Dixie Locke's daughter, and Dixie Locke was known to be Elvis's first girlfriend. And I had to ask her what her mother thought about the Elvis 2022 movie. And she said that right after the movie, after they had come out from watching it, Dixie said, I don't really ever remember Gladys drinking. I don't remember her cursing. So those kind of a discrepancy that kind of maybe led us down this rabbit hole that we're kind of going to go on.
Yeah, because we were like, well, Christy told us that her mom said that, and Dixie
Hmm.
was definitely present in Elvis's life and
Definitely.
knew Gladys very well. And I believe June doesn't say much about it either. June
I don't
Wanaka
think so.
was one of Elvis's girlfriends early on in his career. But in Dundee's book, Elvis and Gladys, she says, kind of highlights that when they moved into Graceland in 1957, this, huge house,
Yep.
Dundee says it was supposed to be her monument, Gladys's monument, but became
Hmm.
her mausoleum. She couldn't do her grocery shopping and she could see very few people, and that made her morbid. I mean, if
Yeah.
we're just thinking about the change between where she grew up and then
Hmm.
Graceland, like,
Yeah. Like they starting like thinking about Elvis's life, they started in Tupelo at the birthplace in that little shotgun house. And then now you're in Graceland where we say that that house could fit into the living room. And
right.
I know before you had mentioned it's not like Audubon. Audubon was surrounded by other people. You kind of had somewhat of a normal life situation where you have your neighbors and a bit of a community. Whereas Graceland, it's that house on the hill. You don't really have anybody surrounding you. It's just your isolated own little world.
Yeah, like Audubon Drive. So that was the first house that Elvis
Hmm.
bought, like for his parents. And it's just kind of a normal house. It's like a ranch style
Yeah.
house in Memphis. I mean, it's a beautiful house, but it's not Graceland. It's not as isolated,
Hmm.
Gladys could still interact with the neighbors, which
Yeah.
caused some problems. They didn't want her
Hmm.
to put her laundry out, that type of thing, because then fans would
Yeah.
like jump over the fence and try to
Yeah.
steal Elvis's like underwear. Um,
Well, mhm.
but like Graceland was a totally different ballpark. It was just
Yes.
like this beautiful place that represented, everything he wanted for his mother, but
Mhm.
it was so far removed from this hardworking like family that she grew up in that like struggled to make ends meet, this big
Yeah.
family. And I don't know, it must have been just so strange for her. And a lot of what we've read kind of emphasizes that.
Yeah. And so again, we took a lot of quotes from Elvis and Gladys. And another one of those was Gladys Presley's alcoholism was a significant factor in the deterioration of her health and the complexities of her relationship with Elvis. It is crucial to understand how deeply her dependency affected both her own life and her son's.
Right. And, we were talking about their closeness before,
Yep.
and kind of this problem, this addiction that Gladys was toying with and struggling with
Hmm.
in around, we're talking like 1957. So Elvis's career is like really taking off. He's starting to be in movies, and
Yep.
um, Gladys and Vernon actually appear in one of his movies, which is Loving You.
Hmm.
They're just in the crowd. But, you know, and the pictures from behind the scenes of that movie are like, she just looks so concerned for him and worried. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
this, from what we've read, it seems that a lot of her worry, you know, like manifested itself in alcoholism.
Correct. So you're just kind of seeing that she's, I guess, trying to alleviate some of the stress from the concern by with the alcoholism. Like they're kind of correlating together.
Absolutely. That she's both like grateful that this
Hmm.
amazing thing has happened to her son, but also it happened so, so quickly. And like it had never happened
Yep.
to anyone before. There was no
Hmm.
roadmap. Um,
And so,
and
and another quote we have from Elvis and Gladys again, Elvis and Gladys giving us all the information we need,
please,
saying that Gladys's battle with alcohol was not just a personal struggle, but a source of deep concern and distress for Elvis, who felt helpless as he watched his mother's condition worsen. So,
right,
kind of reiterating the same thing, she was doing it out of a deep concern for him, but this also really affected Elvis.
right, because they were so close.
Hmm.
And then we have a little something from Vernon. So
Yeah.
in Peter Guralnick's, it's kind of considered like the typical, like the overall biography of Elvis.
Yes.
So this is Last Train to Memphis, and then there's
Mhm.
there's two parts,
Careless
but
love.
careless love.
It was,
So Vernon says that Gladys never drank until after Elvis got into show business. After that, she just started drinking for one reason or another. Um, and his cousin Billy Smith also talks about Gladys's alcoholism, which we just thought it was interesting compared to what like Dixie had said,
yeah,
that there were a bunch of other people who did kind of account for,
notice.
right, that it was
Yeah.
there. Um, so Billy said, I remember Gladys drinking a lot more after Elvis became famous. I think she just couldn't cope with all the pressure and the worry. Um, and this kind of
Yeah.
like, this became more of a problem in 1958, right?
Yeah, so we're getting to August 1958. At this point, Elvis is at Fort Hood for doing his training when he gets notice that his mother has become ill. And so they send her home to Memphis. So she was in Texas with them. They send her home to Memphis to get better treatments from her regular doctor.
Mm-hmm. And while there, so Elvis is still in basic training because he was drafted into the Army.
Hmm.
So August 9th, 1958, Elvis was rushed to Methodist Hospital in Memphis, straight from Graceland. And Elvis continued doing his basic training, which he
Yep.
was like required to do. And then after, this is a quote, after more effort than it
Mhm.
would take any ordinary soldier, he was finally granted emergency leave.
Yes. So that was on August 12th. And once he gets that emergency leave, he is then flying from Texas to Memphis, even though Gladys told him that she did not like him flying. She's very scared that that would be the way he died, would be in the plane.
Right.
But he did it anyway.
He
Quickest
did
way
it
to get
anyway.
there. Yes.
To see his mom. And I
Mhm.
just feel like that, concern for her, but also like wanting to honor how she had told him,
Yeah.
like, please don't do that, whatever.
Please
Like
don't do that.
I don't know. It's interesting to hear
Mhm.
about. And then also like, I can't believe it was so hard for him to get out of training. Like he threatened to go AWOL.
Yeah,
He
he
threatened to go
did.
AWOL. And then they finally were like, okay, okay. Like,
Yeah, fine, fine, fine.
right.
But and then eventually on August 18th, around 3:15
August
a.m.,
14th.
August 14th, thank you. At 3:15 a.m., Gladys passed away at the age of 46. The cause of death was determined to be a heart attack.
Right. And a lot of accounts kind of suggest that that was due to she developed acute hepatitis,
Hmm.
thought to be a side effect of alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
So sad.
Yes,
And it had such a huge, profound effect
it did.
on
So
this.
they're saying that, we talked about the closest between Gladys and Elvis. And so obviously losing his mother, it's going to be a drastic change in his life. He's going to experience this great loss and have a hole in his life, basically.
Right. And
But
it was a huge tragedy, much in the way
mhm,
that Gladys lost her parents when big
yeah,
things and big changes were happening.
and at an early age too.
Right. So when big things and big changes were happening to Elvis, he lost his mother. And like,
Hmm.
to me, that always felt like that was, his moral compass was like his mother. And once
Exactly,
he
which is
lost her,
something I think George Klein kind of points to is like without her, Elvis was lost.
right.
That he gave her basically life. No, she gave him life in a way,
Yeah.
or helped guide him, put him on the right course in life.
Hmm.
So,
Instilled the
but
values that her parents had
yes.
instilled in her of being hardworking
Hmm.
and, you know, appreciating what you had. They like
Yeah.
saved every penny and they were tried to be financially responsible and
Hmm.
work hard for what they had.
Yeah.
All of that to say that her presence loomed large over Elvis for the remainder of his
Hmm.
life. Not only just like the music he chose to record, uh, but also he maintained closeness to his mother even after she passed.
Definitely. And one of, I think, the ways that he remained close to her, even after her passing, is kind of also a sign of their bond. He actually kept a lot of her belongings in the act of Graceland. So he kept things like her jewelry, the, gifts that he gave her, her outfits, all of her clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, would you like to share with us that he did keep?
Yeah, so she Gladys kept
Yeah.
in one of her purses. Um, the archivist at Graceland, Angie Marchese, I just watched a little video of her talking about some of
Yeah.
Gladys's belongings, and this was something she was saying that they found one of Gladys's purses in the attic, and it was kind of like it shoved in a corner, but like wrapped in newspaper, and they could figure out it was from 1958, I think, 57,
57,
58,
58.
because of the newspaper that was around it. And inside they found Elvis's wallet that he had like misplaced and must have, his mother must have picked it up and put it in her purse. And then some love letters from his girlfriend,
Yes.
Dixie Locke. So she talks a little bit about that in her memoir.
Yeah, so if you want to read those love letters, they are there in Unlocked by Dixie Locke that she wrote with her daughter Christy. And they're very wonderful. You got to read them.
Yeah. And so he just kept everything to do with his mother. Like he instructed them not to touch her room. Everything was, even, to this day, we still see like her clothes hanging in the closet. The pictures around the way that she left them and the way that she had, photos of her son. And it's just, I think, really nice that we're able to see that it's in the downstairs part of Graceland, that you're able to kind of like get a glimpse of her. I don't know. I found that like the poodle wallpaper on the walls.
I love the poodle wallpaper.
I know. And it's like,
and I think in the trophy room, I think there's earrings of hers that were kept. Yeah.
I was just thinking about it. It's like two little carriages and they look homemade. I'm sure maybe a fan gave them to her or something. I don't know. And they say like Elvis Presley, and they had her jewelry, like a little jewelry box in her jewelry. And it was like, he kept all of those things.
He did.
Yeah.
Which is really sweet and just shows kind of the impact that she had on him.
Huge. I mean, huge. She from her parents got this hardworking, grateful, and giving attitude. And I think she passed on that generosity and hardworkingness to Elvis in the way that she brought him up.
So I think we can definitely say that without Gladys, without the influence from Doll and Bob Smith, that Gladys would not have been the woman or mother that she was, and certainly Elvis would not have been the star, icon, and man that he was.
Right. Yeah. And it was I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit about Gladys. There is like so much more to talk about.
So much more.
She's such an interesting person. And I think someone I really, really enjoyed like researching and learning more about her upbringing. It offered a great perspective on how we got Elvis, how he became the king of rock and roll, And
I think if you want to learn more about it, we definitely recommend reading Elvis and Gladys. It definitely covers all of Gladys, a little bit of her heritage, her lineage, and then the relationship between Elvis and Gladys, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my favorite Elvis books that I've read, just because it was super well researched and had a lot of good information and perspective.
So with that being said, that kind of wraps up Gladys's side of the family, and we will bring you guys Brittany's side of the family next.
Yes, we got to hit those double first
we got to do
so many relatives.
We got to cover it all full circle.
Oh my goodness. Buckle in for this series, guys.
Buckle in.
The research, like I'm telling you, I was scouring Find a Grave. Like,
and then I told you to check the census. And we're going through old records, marriage license,
because
draft
there was some name that I was like, who is this elusive John William Smith? Is this a brother? It says he's an uncle on Find a Grave, and then you're going to check the census, and it was just a whole.
It was a whole mess.
And then the census, there was some other brother, alleged brother, who actually wasn't a brother. We don't think. I mean,
we don't think either.
Covered a family secret. I don't really know.
Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe.
Always check the records.
Check the census. Check the census. I know. It was so funny. We're trying to read this handwriting, like scrolling in. It was fun, though.
Yeah. It was fun. I enjoyed it. And hopefully you guys all enjoy our research. So, summing up for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in.
With TLC from us to you.
Yeah. Keep taking care of business.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.